Yesterday, we received Mark Carney's economic update for spring 2026. And well, it's not too great. Let's get into it. So you might have heard the Prime Minister bragging about how the deficit is $11 billion lower than it was expected to be. And while that is better news than it being equal to or over, it's still higher than Justin Trudeau's deficit from 2024 and is the biggest deficit on record. The projected deficits over the next couple of fiscal years until 2028 show the same trend. They go, all of them hover in the $60 to $70 billion range. But there's a couple key points I want to make about deficits and the economy. Everybody hears that these deficits will add to the national debt and burden future generations with debts that they should not owe, as well as limit our future policy options. But I find that a lot of people, average everyday people, don't really know why deficits are bad. Because here's the deal. When you spend on programs, it creates deficits, or it adds to an already existing deficit. Meaning that the government is either going to have to raise your taxes to pay for it, print money to pay for it, which will cause inflation, or borrow money from the banks, which will raise interest rates. But with less programs, it doesn't need to do those things, and inflation comes down. But why doesn't the government do that? Well, simply put, they want you to be reliant on government programs as opposed to having money in your bank account so that you can have the freedom to do whatever you want, to the freedom to be a citizen in a free country. And this is why I've been against crazy spending, big government, huge programs, unnecessary. I guess I should put it unnecessary big government. Maybe just unnecessary government. When governments seem to have this need to push all these programs to make you as reliant as possible on them, so that way you have less money, less power, and you're under their thumb, essentially. Almost every time there's a big government with huge programs, and I'm not saying all of them are bad. Most of them are just poorly managed. I'm not against something like some of the fundamental, like, your OSAPs and your old age pensions and your whatever, as long as they're being run well, which they're not. And there's plenty of loopholes in those programs people are taking advantage of. And you have a lot of, frankly, losers who are taking advantage of like disability benefits that, even though they don't have a disability because they found a loophole, they found a way to cheat the system. And it's unfortunate because people that actually need those programs, and the people that are just taking advantage of them don't. So I'm not against all programs. Some of them are necessary. But when you have too many and you spend too much, bringing this back to the deficit, you expand the deficit, inflation goes up, interest rates go up, and taxes go up. None of those are good things, when instead, if you just cut the programs, half the time, the problem that those programs are trying to solve would be solved without the programs. But they don't want to do that. That is why conservatives, myself included, fiscal conservatives in general, and most business people worth their salt, are against big program spending. Not to mention, it's not just programs, it's sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, a war that we frankly have no business being in. Or sending money to Africa, or what else. And I'm not against foreign aid, again, but when we have such an economic crisis here at home, it's reckless to just send billions of dollars overseas when it could be here, shrinking the deficit, making taxes, inflation, interest rates lower, making things more affordable by shrinking the deficit. And then we get to limiting policy options in the future as well. Because if you have all these programs and people become so reliant on them, then in the future, when an even worse economic crisis hits, what are you going to do? You're going to have to slash even more programs, and some people are genuinely reliant on those, but you're going to have to slash them even harder, and then you're going to be even less popular, and there'll be more political uncertainty, and so on and so forth. You're causing chaos for the future and instability now. The projected deficit for 2026, I believe, was up between 30, I think it was like 31 billion. It was between 30 and 40 billion dollars. And that was, I believe, projected when Justin Trudeau was still prime minister. So Mark Carney has essentially doubled Justin Trudeau's expected deficit. I'm sure Justin Trudeau would have blown 20 billion more anyway. I think it's a little unfair to say that Carney has doubled Trudeau's deficit, but it's still the highest deficit in Canadian history. The next two deficits for 2027 and 2020, from 2026 to 2027 and 2027 to 2028, those two fiscal years, those two deficits are going to be equally as high, all in from the 60 to 70 billion dollars range. Inflation's going to keep going up. I guess it depends on how they want to pay for it, right? They're either going to raise taxes, print money, or or borrow it, which from the banks. But deficits make things go get more expensive. Sorry, and this doesn't just affect the economy. Everything goes back to the economy, folks. When the economy is bad, and these are trends. Like I will put some data on screen. If I'll try and find some data that I can put on screen here, or at the very least link in the description. When the economy is worse, crime goes up. Less children are born because families can't afford to raise them, which we can't afford as a country, because one of the biggest crises we're going to face, maybe it's not the biggest crisis right now, but I would say about 5 to 10 years, the biggest, maybe even less than 5 years, the biggest crisis in Canada is going to be our aging population. And we cannot afford not to have kids right now, but we also can't afford to have kids as long as they keep running these massive deficits. But then on top of it, the bigger the deficit, the longer it takes to clean up. When Jean Chrétien came into power in 1993, the Mulroney government had been running massive deficit after massive deficit. They had a scrambling cabinet. It was not well managed at all. Not to say that Brian Mulroney didn't do some very good things, but how it ended was completely terrible, and Kim Campbell definitely did not help the situation at all. And it took him, I believe, until 1996 or 1997 before he started to actually be able to balance the budget. It took him multiple years of consistent cutting to be able to run a balanced budget. And then afterwards, he was able to run surpluses. But it took him years. And by the end of Jean Chrétien's term, life was very affordable. In 2003, life was far more affordable than it was in the early 90s recession. Things were looking very good, but it took him years to do so. And the current deficit is multiple times bigger than the one Brian Mulroney left behind. So how many more years is it going to take? And another example is Stephen Harper, because Paul Martin had run deficits, and it took him years to be, and then of course the 2008 recession hit and the global financial crisis. And there are times when running a deficit, if done strategically, if done smartly, if done intelligently, can help stimulate the economy, but not by sending money overseas, not by reckless program spending. It has to be strategic investment in the private sector. And so he did run a deficit for 2008 to 2009 that did help us get out of that recession much faster than, say, the United States. But even then, because of Paul Martin's deficit and because of partly his own, it took him many years. It took him until, I believe, 2014 before he would be able to balance a budget. It's not an easy feat to be able to balance a budget. It's not an easy feat to run a surplus, especially if the people before you were nincompoops. It is not an easy feat. So I commend every prime minister who's been able to do it. But when you have somebody like Justin Trudeau, who ran $60 billion deficit in 2024, and then Mark Carney running a $60 billion deficit from 2025 to 2026, it takes a lot longer for someone to clean up. And whether that be the Conservatives, or if somehow the Liberals elect a new leader for whatever reason, or who knows, the NDP win the next election, whoever is in that position after Carney, even if it's Carney himself, it's going to take a lot longer for things to get better. Because that's the thing about deficits that I'm trying to articulate here, is that deficits don't just damage the economy now, but the bigger the deficit, the longer it makes it for the longer it takes and the more difficult it makes it for things to get better afterwards. So it's not just damage now, it causes it to be more difficult in the future to make things better. That is the damage of deficits. And again, this affects crime rates. Crime rates go up. This affects birth rates. Birth rates drop. And in the current situation in Canada, we cannot afford those things. If people are unemployed, it affects, like, they're going to be homeless, more homeless. And then that affects food bank lineups because they're running out of resources. And once they run out of resources, people are going to start starving to death. It affects everything. It affects everything. So managing the economy is by far the most important thing you can do right as a president, as a prime minister. Managing it correctly is the most important. I cannot think of a single issue that doesn't go back to the economy somehow. Not one. Not one. And then when things look bad too, mental health collapses, suicide rates go up, people are confused. And then it doesn't help that they're trying to push agenda in the schools, just saying. It messes everything up. The best thing you can do as a prime minister or as a president is manage the economy successfully. And every economy works a little bit differently. I get that. But here in Canada, that it all comes back to the budget. It all comes back to how big the deficit is. You cannot have a deficit budget. Or at least, it's certainly not a growing deficit budget. It all comes back to the deficit. That is why I get concerned, why a lot of people get concerned when these deficits get so big. I wanted to spend some time to clear the air, because a lot of people hear about deficits, whatever, but they think it's good. Oh, $6 billion into this. Why wouldn't that be good? Well, first of all, Justin Trudeau put a lot of money into a lot of places. Many prime ministers have. The results are very lackluster. They don't really produce results. In fact, like I said, they make things much, much worse. And then when you go to the deficit, cost of living goes up, then crime goes up, birth rates go down, suicide rates go up, everything gets worse. That's why this is concerning. And let me restate, this is the biggest deficit in Canadian history. It may be 11 billion less than it was expected to be. Whoop-de-doo. It's still the biggest deficit in Canadian history. I think that the opposition is being a little facetious when they say that it's twice as big as Trudeau's, because it's not twice as big as the one Trudeau ran in 2024. And Justin Trudeau would have blown past the 31 billion estimate anyway, maybe even more than Carney. But I'm just saying that to be completely fair here. But it's still terrible. It affects everything. And if you're not paying attention to what's going on in your country, now's the time to start. Because here's the thing. God has his hand on this nation. I believe that we're heading towards a better future. I believe that Canada's best days are yet to come. I believe that hope is alive. I believe it's possible. But covenant does not negate responsibility. We still have to do our part. I started this YouTube channel, started making these videos to try and do my part. This is what I feel called to do. It's time we all start to do our part. Write to your MPs, write to your senators, write to your public officials. Share videos like this, share posts, start making posts, take to X, take to whatever it takes. Take to Facebook, do something. It's about time we all started getting involved, because this matters. This matters more than I don't know. I don't want to put I don't want to put a label on it because just I don't know. I don't want to say something I don't mean. But this is very important. This is probably the most important thing anyone can do is get involved politically. A lot of people write off politics as oh, it's just for like these corrupt big wigs and blah blah blah. But it doesn't have to be. Get involved. I always preach that. Get involved. All right. God bless you. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one. If there's any other updates, I'll keep you updated. All right. See ya.